Welcome to the Alternative Dog Moms podcast. I'm Kimberly Gauthier, creator of Keep the Tail Wagging. I've been blogging about raw feeding, pet wellness, and life as a crazy dog mom for more than 10 years. I've seen massive improvements in my dog's health since I began raising my dogs naturally, and I'm passionate about sharing my experience to help other pet parents.
I'm Erin Scott from the Believe in Dog podcast. For more than 10 years, I've been researching and learning everything I can about healing cancer, allergies, autoimmune, and mystery illnesses in both my dogs and myself. And I can't wait to share with you everything I've learned in case it could help you too. As the Alternative Dog Moms, Kimberly and I are bringing you all the latest dog health news that we're following and the brilliant people we're meeting along the way. Now let's get started. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello, Erin.
I'm totally nerding out about our interview today. I'm very excited to introduce veterinarian Dr. Jake Ryave from the Dog Aging Project. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So I can't wait to learn more about this. And I'm curious from your end, had you always wanted to be a veterinarian? And how did you get drawn to working in this particular project?
Yeah, I've had the classic story. I've wanted to be a veterinarian since pretty much as early as I could talk, as early as I could walk. I grew up with dogs my whole life and just fell in love with them from a very young age. And a lot of it dates back to the Great Dane that I grew up with, who had a number of health issues. And, seeing the people and the care teams that were there to make sure that she stayed healthy despite these issues, and seeing her come home after surgeries and after illnesses and realizing there are people out there to take care of her and make sure that she's okay. I realized that's something I wanted to give back to the world. And I had been saying it up until that point. That happened when I was about 16, and that really solidified it for me. And it's been veterinary medicine ever since. This project, I found myself in this project following our match process. So my long-term goal is to become a board-certified veterinary cardiologist. And the residency matching process is this big, long process over a number of months. And at the end of last year's process, I did not get a residency, and I was reached out to by the Dog Aging Project. And they said, hey, we've got this position. It's great for someone interested in cardiology. We think you'd be a great fit. I interviewed with them. I got to know the project a little bit better. And I had a number of other offers after the match process, and this project just blew me away in its scope, in what it's doing for dogs and for owners as well. And the team that I work with, I could tell from the interviews that this was going to be one of the best, if not the best, work environments I've ever been a part of. It is so supportive and so collaborative and so wonderful that I knew that this was the right place for me this year as a nice stepping stone towards my long-term career goal. And it's helped me grow as a doctor, as a cardiologist, as a person along the way. So couldn't be happier having ended up with this project, even though it wasn't exactly in my sights as of last year.
So what can you tell us about the Dog Aging Project and how it came to be and what the goals are?
Yeah. So it came to be long before I was even a veterinarian. This has been a project that's been going on for about a decade, if not a little bit longer now. It's the largest, or one of the largest, if not the largest, community science projects in the veterinary field right now. We have about 50,000 plus dogs enrolled in we call it the DAP pack, so the Dog Aging Project pack. And it's, like I said, community science. We are the research team, but the scientists are the owners. They are the ones that are doing a lot of this legwork. They take their dog to the vet and send us their records. They fill out surveys about their dog's health, about diseases that their dog may have, any changes to their dog's well-being that we might want to know about. They perform activities that we request of them, things looking at mobility in dogs and things looking at cognitive function in dogs. And all of this data that they collect for us, they'll send to us. And we have a massive database now over the past decade of all of these dogs that we can use to better understand the aging process. And especially as we follow these dogs throughout their own individual lives, we can look at what changes happen. And with such a large number of animals that we're evaluating, we have, like I said, a very robust database that's going to help us be able to look at all different types of breeds, all different disease processes, different environmental factors, right? We have dogs that live in rural Florida and in Seattle, Washington, all across the country. And so we have very different environmental factors that we can even evaluate to see what roles do these play in the aging process in dogs. One of the really big things that I think sometimes goes unspoken about this project is the translational aspect. So yes, we're looking at the aging process in dogs, but especially when I talk about the environmental factor, dogs and humans, especially companion dogs, we share the same environment. We breathe the same air. We sleep in the same bed a lot of the times, at least my dog and I do. We play in the same yards. We eat the same food, at least as far as table scraps go. And so we are not just looking at the aging process in dogs, but we're hoping that this can help human researchers understand human aging a bit better, especially in regards to environmental factors. And so the project has a number of different scopes and a number of different cohorts within the entire pack. But the main goal in the end, like you mentioned at the beginning, is we want dogs to live healthier and we potentially want dogs to live longer. And so if we can understand the aging process and all the different factors that play a role in it, we can potentially make that happen. And then maybe something can happen with humans too, and we can understand our own aging process a little bit better.
Nice. Is there anything that you guys have noticed as a trend that you were surprised by?
That's a really good question. It's a tricky one to answer because we each have our own individual research projects that we're working on. And so when I think about trends that I'm seeing, I immediately think about my individual research. And so looking at mobility and looking at how gait speed in dogs might be able to predict the aging process in healthy aging because it does in humans. And so I could talk about trends with that for hours and hours and hours. In the entire pack as a whole, I don't know that there's one major trend that sticks out that says, we've noticed that out of these 50,000 dogs, all of them are doing this one thing, and those dogs are living longer. I don't know that we're going to get that answer anytime soon. But especially I'm sure we'll talk about this in a bit when we talk about our interventional trial, which is our smallest cohort. That's the one where we're really looking for trends, especially in regards to the medication that we're giving them. But as a whole, there's not been any groundbreaking trend that we've noticed in the pack as a whole. The data that we have, we've released a number, I don't remember the exact number of yearly curated data releases right now. And so that is, we take all of our data, we package it up nicely, we put it out there for the public as well as our team to use. And so it's available to anyone free of charge. You have to fill out a form about how to use the data appropriately, and then you can use it. And so there are a lot of trends still to be found in the data. We're looking at a lot of them, but the great news is that any veterinarian, any researcher, any scientist, any owner who's interested in looking at trends can access that data and do it themselves as well.
Oh, that's really cool to know. So when you say gait, do you mean like the way they walk?
Specifically the speed at which they walk.
Oh, okay.
And so my project specifically comes from the idea of frailty in humans. So frailty is the ability to, or I should say, the predisposition to developing disease or risk of injury. And so as people get older, they can become frail. And research has shown that people who are frail, based on a number of different tests that human doctors can do, are more likely to either develop diseases or become injured. And in the end, it can predict mortality.
Hmm.
And so one of the big markers of frailty in humans is gait speed. If you walk 10 meters, let's say, over a certain amount of time, a normal person, let's say, will do that in 6 seconds. That's a totally random number. Don't cite that anywhere, please. Someone who's frail might do that in 8 seconds or 9 seconds, right? So your gait speed will decrease as a marker of frailty. And in humans, that's really easy to measure because pretty much every human is about the same size and their legs are about the same length, give or take, and they walk about the same speed. And then we thought about, well, how can we use this in dogs? And we hit a wall immediately. Well, here's a Great Dane and here's a Chihuahua. Do we really expect them to move at the same speed? And so my work is very early on in the process of trying to correct for that and figure out
Hmm.
what physical factors are going to predict gait speed in dogs. Is it their body weight? Is it their leg length? Is it the length of their snout? Is it the length of their tail? We looked at a number of different factors to try to figure out what's the most important factor that will say, here's how fast this individual dog should be walking. And we found that the most important thing that we know about right now is actually just body weight alone is the strongest predictor of speed. And so a larger dog, heavier dog is going to move faster than a smaller dog. And that makes sense. Their legs are usually longer. They're usually bigger. And so I'm glad we found that because it makes sense intuitively. And then in the future, the plan is to take this work and understand better, well, what does that speed mean, right? We know what a normal might be. We might be able to predict for, any given fluffy out there that they should be walking at this speed. Well, what does it mean if next year they're doing it a second slower? right?
Mhm.
How does that tell us about their risk of disease or their risk of death? So there's a lot of research that still needs to come out of this, but we're at least starting to lay the groundwork for understanding if this is something we could use in dogs to better understand the aging process and better predict some adverse events that might happen in a dog's life.
I like that because it takes something that we probably kind of take for granted and we don't really pay attention to and just add some importance to it. There are so many things just with the dog aging project and things that you guys have come out so far. The biggest thing that I always think of is the feeding once a day where again, we have a habit of feeding our dogs twice a day. We don't really think about it. We feed our dogs twice a day, basically on schedule because there's the, my dog can tell time type of
Hmm.
message. So you got to do it on point. And it's little things like that that have come out over the years that have made me question why I do the things I do. And if the answer is, and it's actually funny because at my day job, my boss and I joke about this all the time, if the answer is because it's always been done that way, then that's not good enough. We need to figure out,
Absolutely.
what we actually need to do. And what you were saying, I have a young dog. She's 2. She has such long legs, but she's a small dog. My biggest dog, they stand at almost the same height. He's 80 pounds. She's about 50, 55 pounds.
Hmm.
But her legs are so long that people will question, like, well, what is she mixed with? Because they stand out. But watching her race across the property to chase a ball is kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, the feeding once a day research is very interesting, and I'm still not sure that we know, a true reason for that, right? We don't have it's a metabolic thing or it's a gastrointestinal thing, and so there's definitely some more work to be done on understanding why we found that trend. And personally, I still feed my dog twice a day. That's always
Me
how I've
too.
done it, but it is something that made me stop and think. Well, why am I doing this twice a day? Is this
Mhm.
something that I need to change? And it's not something I've changed yet. I think the main reason is I think my dog would be very mad at me if he stopped getting the second meal after getting it for 8 years. But no, it's that was definitely a big finding and one of the papers that people talk about a lot.
Yeah. I still feed twice a day. I just don't feed at the same time twice a day, and, I fast my dogs at least once a week now. But, I mean, I've been doing that for a while, but just that article just sort of solidifies there are no rules. I can feed my
Yes,
dogs the way I wanna feed them, and they're gonna be fine, and they'll adapt, but
right.
I agree with
If they're
you.
getting the calories they need and they're getting the nutrients they
Yeah,
need, then there's no one right way to do things. Absolutely.
exactly.
So, something that Kimberly and I often hear in our community of listeners and of people who are really into their dog's health is this kind of generalized statement of like, well, dogs today don't live as long as they used to. And is there actually any data that backs that up? Or I'm never quite sure exactly where that kind of generalization comes from.
I don't know of any data that backs that up. And I often hear something that kind of goes against that in a way of, well, dogs that nowadays are getting way more cancer than they used to 40, 50 years ago. And a lot of people naturally want to try and point fingers at why that might be. Well, is it the food that's processed? Is it the medications we're giving them? Is it X, Y, or Z reason? And the argument that I've heard for why we're seeing more cancer is because dogs are living longer overall. Cancer is a disease that is more prevalent with age in dogs and humans and cats and mice and rats and every species, right? As you get older, your risk of cancer goes up. And so I think we're seeing a lot more of these diseases more commonly because medicine, nutrition, all of the things that keep our dogs healthy is getting so much better. And while I again don't have any actual data right off the top of my head to support that, I do think that we're seeing dogs live longer overall because of the medicine that we've developed over the past 30, 40, 50, even 100 years in veterinary medicine. But I have heard that as well, the idea that dogs aren't living as long, and I've heard a lot of that being pointed to diet as a cause, that the food is so processed now that they're not living as long. And I don't know that that's true, but that is something that I can't say I'm an expert in, despite being as part of the dog aging project. So I will need to look into that as well. And of course, if I find anything that goes against something I say, I will reach out to you and send you the info that I find as well.
Yeah. I think a lot of times with longevity, we have to also look at breeding and environment. I mean, because I'm one of those people that I do think part of it has to do with diet, whether or not is directly connected to longevity. I kind of connect diet to sickness or illness because when I fed my dogs processed food, I was going to the vet more often for dogs that were at a healthy age. Whereas as senior dogs fed a fresh food diet, I rarely have to go to the vet. It's just mostly wellness checks. They're just so much healthier. But they also have a very stress-free life. I live on land, so they have tons of places to roam and explore. And I also may have just gotten lucky. But, I have friends who have, like a friend of mine just lost her dog to two cancers at 6 years old. And she fed that dog a raw diet from day one. They live on land. The dog has access to tons of, wonderful things outside and inside, leads a stress-free life. But I mean, there are just so many things. And I think when we get into social media and these groups and we start kind of comparing notes, we come to our own conclusions as to what could possibly be going on. I'm sure that there's a word for it where we're just basically, without really taking the time to look at all the factors and even factors that won't support what we're doing, we're just coming to a conclusion that we pretty much already came to. We're just kind of
Yeah,
supporting it.
absolutely. And you bring up a great point that aging and health in general, it's so multifactorial. Uh, while we want to understand aging better and we want to make dogs live healthier and live longer, there's never going to be one silver bullet that does it, right? We're not going to find one medication that you can give once a day that's going to make your dog live till they're 40. We're not going to find one food that does that. We're not going to find one you know, spray that you can spray in the air to make the
Yeah.
environment better, right? It's never going to be one thing. Everything is multifactorial. It's the same way that your doctors, say that you need to eat well and exercise and take care of your mental health and your physical health, right? It's everything in conglomeration that makes the aging process healthy. And some of it is stuff that you can't change, right? There's genetic factors too, that
Hmm.
despite the best diet and the best exercise and the best environment in the world, we're just never going to be able to change at this point. So it's a great point that we can do everything right and still sometimes just get really unlucky.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you grew up with a Great Dane, and it was making me think of how, and I think the research has shown this too, that the larger the dog, kind of like the shorter the lifespan. And so is that something that the data does back up?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that has been found again and again. And it's really interesting because it is the opposite of what we see in the world as a whole. When we think about lifespan in all mammals, let's say, when we think about a mouse, and an elephant, the smaller an animal is, usually the shorter they live, and the larger they are, the longer they live, right? We think about elephants living 60, 70, 80 years, and mice and hamsters have a lifespan of 2, 3 years. And so in dogs, we actually see the opposite, where smaller dogs live longer than larger dogs. And I don't know that we know exactly why that is yet. We think that, at least for animals as a whole, it has something to do with metabolic rate. So the smaller the animal is, the higher its metabolic rate, faster heartbeat, uh, and the aging process happens a bit more quickly. Whereas an elephant or a great blue whale, they have really slow metabolic rates, really slow heartbeats, and everything kind of moves at a slower pace. But yeah, it's the opposite in dogs. And our data, at least the data that I've worked with so far, when I look at dogs over their lifespan and I see kind of when the populations I'm looking at start to show mortality, it is clear in the data that I'm working with that the smaller dogs are living longer in my study. Granted, it's retrospective, so I'm not going to make any claims on that. It is purely looking at data that they presented to us, nothing that we've done to intervene. But yeah, it's something that we've seen here as well, that smaller dogs do live longer.
And I was also just thinking about when we were talking about like potential environmental factors, and there was a study that was released about how they like put these silicone tags on the dogs to catch what was in the environment and how much how high the exposures were to environmental contaminants. Am I summarizing this accurately?
I'm looking it up right now. I see the silicone passive samplers that domestic dogs are sentinels to support human health research. And that goes along with exactly what I was talking about earlier, that we can understand the dog aging process, but we're hoping it shows something about the human aging process too. And that goes along with, like I said, the environment that we live in is the same. They experience the same smells and sounds that we do. And I think that study is a great way of showing that that's true, right? They pick up the same contaminants that we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, I'll make sure that we have a link to that one if people want to check it out, because it was like all of the things that they measured for were very high, and it was kind of like, yep, that makes sense.
Mhm. And it means that we will likely be uh, predisposed to developing some similar diseases, right? If we are exposed to the same contaminants, I can imagine that our bodies can be affected in a similar way. It's another way that our project is hoping to understand human medicine a little bit better. If we can see in these dogs in a shorter lifespan that, as they get older, they are experiencing this at a higher rate, whatever this might be, maybe that's something that we can say, hey, we might need to look and see, are we seeing this in humans at a higher rate as they get older as well? That's one of the benefits to doing this project in dogs specifically. One is they're amazing in every regard and adorable and so great to work with. And the other is their lifespan is shorter than a human's, right? We expect somewhere between 10 and 20 years, depending on the size of the dog, as a very rough average. But a human lives 80 years on average. And so you can imagine trying to do this in a human and following them for their entire life. Uh, that's going to take 3 career-long researchers to follow one person. And that's only one person, right? So we are able to follow these dogs over a full lifespan and understand everything that happens to them, sometimes from when they sign up as a puppy. We have dogs that sign up the day that they're adopted and then stay in the project for their whole life. And we can see everything that happens on that span in, an eighth of the time that it would take to watch a human do the same thing.
And it also just makes me think about the synergistic effect of all of the contaminants in the environment. Like, for instance, if a company comes out with something and they say, oh, this is proven to be safe, they're looking at it in like a vacuum. Like, this one thing won't kill you right this minute. But nobody's really looking at, but yeah, but you're also including like the stuff that's in the food and the stuff that's in the air and the 5G and the weight, it's like nobody's looking, like studying kind of like the synergistic effect of like all of the assaults on us at all times. And so I thought that silicone tag study was particularly interesting because it was measuring all of the different contaminants.
Absolutely. And there's still so much to know about what that means over a long span of time, right? How are these things not only going to affect us immediately, but what's going to happen 20 years down the road for a human or 10 years down the road for a dog?
Yeah. And plus, a lot of these contaminants, they stay in our soil for decades. So, doing something even once is going to stick around for so long, but we're doing it on a regular basis. So, for instance, with weed killers, it's not a one and done type of situation. Every single time you see a weed, you're out there spraying it and you're doing what you have to do. I hate weeding. But I go out and I spend an afternoon weeding my garden, even in the wintertime, because I try to tell myself I'm keeping on top of everything, because when springtime comes, that's when they really pop out. I mean, it's tempting to try and find, and I look at these products where you can massage it into the soil and it'll kill the weeds and stuff, but my dogs are walking through that soil on a regular basis,
And
so it's
their
just like,
nose is in it,
mm,
sniffing, right?
yeah.
Absolutely. I will say I'm lucky that weeding is one of my favorite chores still, because as a kid, my mom hated it. And so she'd send me out and give me 5 cents for every weed I brought back. And I'd leave with about $3 in my pocket. And I thought I was the richest kid in the world. So it holds a special place in my heart.
I have tried to pay people to do it for me. And I have a tiny little garden. It's not like I have like what I need to weed is so magnificent. It's not. There's certain areas around our property where we've planted things. And so I just have to go and weed. And literally an afternoon, I can get it all done. But the complaining I do internally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But then when you frame it and, this is the better way to do it for the environment, for the earth,
Yeah,
for myself, for my dogs, it's such an easy decision.
absolutely.
I just don't grow things.
And I'm right in the middle where I try, but it doesn't normally work.
I'm really good at growing things. I switched to a container garden for my vegetable garden because that cuts down on the weeding. And since I don't have a bunch of stuff in the soil as much anymore, it does make the weeding go a lot faster. I just turn on a podcast and just get to it. But yeah, I want a big, beautiful vegetable garden, in-ground vegetable garden. But I just know that I will abandon it. And then come June, I'll go out there and it's just covered in weeds and I'll just be like, nope, sorry.
Return to the earth.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It'll just feed the rabbits and the deer that are in the area.
So one of the other things I found really interesting that it seems like the data is showing that goes against what a lot of people think is the idea of I think the scientific term anyway is hybrid vigor. And so I know a lot of people, I'm in the rescue world. And so there's kind of like this thing that like, oh, those purebred dogs get sick all the time. They're going to end up like having all of these diseases. But actually, it seems like from the data that the Dog Aging Project has, is that's not actually a true thing, that there's pretty much equal rates of disease amongst, like a mutt versus a purebred dog.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of bias in the sense that we have a large number of purebred dogs. We have a lot of labs in this country, a lot of French bulldogs, and we have a lot of golden retrievers. And I think because they're such prominent dogs, we often look at them as having higher rates of diseases because maybe we just see it more often. But I agree that the studies have shown and the research has shown that mixed breed dogs also experience a lot of disease and at very similar rates. And so it comes down again to it doesn't always matter that we do everything right. There are just genetic factors, and any given dog at any given moment can develop diseases. And sure, a golden retriever might be predisposed to a specific set of diseases that a mutt or a Boston Terrier might not be. And we know that certain breeds are predisposed to certain diseases. But yeah, it is, even in mixed breed dogs, we're seeing similar rates of diseases.
And so you had alluded to the trial that's going on in the Dog Aging Project. And my understanding is that that's with a drug called rapamycin. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes, you are.
And that there's a theory, or the hypothesis is that could help dogs live longer. It's like a medication that can actually increase lifespan. So can you tell us first, like, what exactly is rapamycin? And so, like, what is the process that it's doing, and about that trial?
Yeah, absolutely. So rapamycin is a medication that is most often used in humans for immunosuppression. And so we often think about it as a drug that's used after organ transplant to try and prevent organ rejection. It works on a receptor that is called the mammalian target of rapamycin, so mTOR. It's one of those weird situations where we found the drug and then actually found the receptor that it works on afterwards. And so the receptor is named after the medication itself. And so it works in the cellular signaling and cellular aging pathway. The exact mechanism, I don't know that we know it entirely, but we think it has a lot of roles in cellular signaling, cellular senescence. It might have something to do with telomere lengthening. So telomeres are the part of the chromosome that have been implicated in their shortening. Occurs with the aging process, and when they get to a certain point where they're too short, cellular reproduction and mitosis can't happen appropriately. And so it plays in all of those roles. And then at a higher dose, it is immunosuppressive. Luckily, the study that we're doing, we do not use it at immunosuppressive doses. And so we are not extremely worried about that. It's not a side effect that we expect to see. But our study is called the test of rapamycin in aging dogs. And we call that TRIAD for short. It is, like you said, a study where we are looking at this medication and seeing if it can increase lifespan. There are a number of other outcomes that we want to see as well. Not only does it increase lifespan, so the physical length of time that any individual dog lives, but also does it increase health span? And so health span is the concept of not just are they alive, but are they alive and healthy? Can they perform all of their activities of daily living? Can they eat? Can they groom themselves, go to the bathroom on their own, right? At what point do they stop being independent and healthy dogs and require significant care? And when that happens is kind of when health span ends, as a kind of general overview of what that means. And then we're also looking at rates of different diseases, specifically cardiologic and neurologic diseases, as we have dogs enrolled into a cardiac arm and a neuro arm. And so the basis of this study is rapamycin has been tested in a number of different organisms, including yeast, nematodes, fruit flies, and mice. And in all of those species, it has shown that it can increase lifespan. So in all four of those species, research has shown that they live significantly longer when they're taking rapamycin or being given rapamycin for the ones that can't ingest it, as opposed to when they don't. And so rapamycin is already being used in human longevity medicine, but we don't know a lot about it in, what we call the quote unquote higher order organisms. And we want to see, knowing that it can increase lifespan and potentially increase health span in other species and other organisms, can it do the same in dogs? And so as a part of the study, a dog will get rapamycin once a week, or potentially a placebo for once a week. It is a double-blinded study, placebo-controlled, meaning that any individual dog has a 50% chance of getting the medication or essentially a sugar pill. I don't know. The owner doesn't know. The veterinarian doesn't know. So that way we kind of eliminate all potential bias in the study. They'll get that medication once a week for a year, and then we monitor them for 2 years afterwards. And monitoring occurs not only at the twice annual visits to the TRIAD clinical site, so a veterinarian, either a cardiologist or a neurologist, but every month we send these owners surveys and say, how is your dog doing? Has anything changed? Have you seen your vet for anything? And you tell us whatever you think we should know. We're monitoring not only to see how long they live overall, but we're monitoring for every possible disease or adverse event that can happen. Did they develop cancer during the study? And at the end, did one group develop more cancer than the other? Or even did they tear their nail the other day? Did that happen more often if they were getting rapamycin or not, right? We want to know every possible adverse event that could happen to really understand what it does in dogs and how safe it is. And so the study started 4-ish years ago, give or take, before I was a part of the dog aging project. And we are currently just under 50% enrolled. Our goal is to enroll about 580 dogs total, and we're right around 200 enrolled. So we're still looking for dogs to enroll. There's a number of different enrollment criteria that dogs will have to meet. And I'm sure that there will be a link somewhere to our website where people can get all that information. I'm happy to talk about it at some point if you want me to. But the study so far is going really well. We have a number, almost 200, of extremely dedicated owners and really, really wonderful dogs that we get to see. Some here at Texas A&M, where I'm located, and at sites all across the country. Like I said, some in Florida, some in Washington, some up in New England, every 6 months. And they are so excited to be a part of this groundbreaking research. And they are responsive and they fill out their surveys, and they will send us extra emails just to send us a picture of their dog on vacation with them. They love being a part of the team and we love having them. And like I said, there's about 300 more spots that we're looking to fill at least. And so anyone who's listening that might be intrigued or interested in more information, I'm sure, like I said, there'll be a link to get more information and try to help this research that we're doing.
So, one of the things that Kimberly and I have noticed over the years when we look at different studies that come out, because we're nerdy and do things like that with dogs, and it often seems like the sample size is very small. And so when you're saying, oh, we have about 300 dogs enrolled and we want to enroll like 300 more, how do you determine what is a good sample size to be able to make generalizations about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And some of that is some statistical stuff that even goes over my head as a veterinarian, as a researcher. But there are a number of different calculations that you can do before developing a study to determine what is the smallest number of dogs or participants, whatever the participant might be, that we would require to detect a true change. And that's called power in a study. And so you or the statistical team will do a number of calculations and determine, based on the study that we're doing, how long it's going, the number of effects that we're looking for, or the strength of a change we want to see, will determine what the power is for that study and how many participants you would need to enroll. And so a smaller change, if we were looking at, does rapamycin make a dog live 1 day longer? You would need a ton of animals to find a really, really, really small change. I can't do these calculations off the top of my head, but we'd be talking thousands, if not more, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. So looking for really, really small changes is very, very difficult. Looking for bigger changes is a little bit easier. And so it's a balance of what kind of change, what kind of outcome is going to be significant for any individual study. And based on what that change is and how you're going to find it, you can do calculations to figure out how many dogs you need. And so in development of this study, it was determined that to be sufficiently powered to have enough dogs to find the change that we want to find, we would need about 600, a little bit less, 580.
So when we see studies that only have like 12 dogs in them or something, or 30 dogs, like, should we not take those quite as seriously, or should we be looking at some of these other factors also of like how big of a change were they trying to see?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely don't think that we should take them any less seriously. I think that I think every research study should be taken with a grain of salt, and maybe not with a grain of salt, but with an inquisitive eye, I think is a better way to say that, right? We want to read these studies and we want to take their results, but we also want to read it critically and read it carefully and say, you know, does the result that they found and the way that they explain it, do those make sense together? Does the jump that they make at the end of saying, well, we found this, and so if X, then Y, what does that mean for dogs, right? We can find a number that's significant, but it doesn't always mean that something is relevant or important. And so I think as long as we read studies critically and we read studies with a very careful and curious and scientific eye, even if they're really, really small studies, that doesn't mean that their value is lesser. I think it's a problem in veterinary medicine as a whole and has been for a long time and probably will be for a very long time, that enrolling large numbers of animals is difficult for a number of different reasons. One is that veterinary medicine and finding veterinary care can be really expensive and can be prohibitive. And so there are a lot of people that will never learn about these studies because they're not able to go to the cardiologist that's running the study, or they're not able to go to the oncologist that's running the study. Part of it is that uh, we don't have as many animals as a whole in the country. There's a lot of animals for sure, but a lot of them don't see a vet on a regular basis, regardless of finances, or don't want to be parts of studies, right? And a lot of times there are a lot of other options, whereas in human studies, sometimes that's the best option is a research trial. And so there's a number of different causes, a number of different reasons why these studies might be smaller. And some of it is, if we wanted to get to the 580 number for all of these studies, say that were an appropriate number for all of these studies would last for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 plus years. And I think it's important to find the balance between what is important to get out now, what is important that people know. And if I publish a study of 12 cats or 12 dogs, it's really small. And maybe we need a lot more animals to solidify this and to find that it's a repeatable finding. But if I put this out into the world now, then 15 other veterinarians are going to say, hey, I was curious about that too. Maybe I can repeat that study, or maybe we can all work together and use what they did, that starting work, to lay the groundwork for our next study. And so there's a lot of reasons why those smaller studies are still very important. They get a lot of new information into the world. They get a lot of potentially groundbreaking information into the world, and they open the door for, every study is going to open the door for at least one more study, if not 2, 3, 4, 5 more. And the more people that have access to that, the more research we'll have down the road. And so I think it's definitely a snowball effect where even if it's small, and even if, sure, it would be nice to have 100 as opposed to 10, if it gets people thinking and gets people working on let's repeat that and make sure that it's real and maybe find something else along the way. It was important in itself.
I think that's a really helpful perspective for us all to have.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because I think I do tend to dismiss a lot of studies because when I go and read into the details of it, it's, yeah, 12, 15 dogs over, a 12-month period. The one that I'm thinking of in particular, I think should have been dismissed because they were claiming health issues with the diet that I don't think can be determined over a 12-month period. I think it takes a lot longer for us to see. Like I think that, Rodney Habib, that's where I heard it from first, was the honeymoon period of a supplement or a diet change where you'll see, your dog has more energy and, and doing all these things. And so like it works, but then that's kind of fades away. And I saw this with joint supplements. I used to change joint supplements all the time because it was like, oh, it didn't work. It didn't work. Whereas like, no, you actually just have to consistently do it. And a veterinarian actually told me that. And it's like, no, you have to stick with this for a while for you to actually see the benefits. Every time you start with a new supplement, you're basically starting from scratch. And now all these years later, I was pretty much just giving my dog, I didn't know what I was doing, but I wasn't doing myself any favors and I wasn't doing my dogs any favors either.
Yeah, I think that, I can't speak to the study that you're talking about directly, but I think that that is exactly the critical eye that we need to take, right? Is they publish a finding and not necessarily reading a study just to find flaws in it, but
Mhm.
if it gives you pause and makes you think something feels off, then looking at it with that really critical eye and saying, well, what might I have done differently? And you might not be the person, this is the general you, not you directly, Kimberly, to repeat that study in a different way, right? But just being able to read something and not necessarily take it at face value, but sit with it for a minute and really be a scientist about it and say, what might I have done differently to make me like this study a little bit more, or
Mhm.
to really feel confident in its results? And sometimes the answer is nothing, and that's great. But sometimes you get a study like that where you say, I'm not going to take this at face value. Maybe once a study does it a bit differently, um,
Yeah.
and fixes this problem that I see in it, then I might say, okay, well, now I'll adopt this as something that I do with my own dog. And so I agree. I think that's a great example of that critical eye.
Yeah, and I think that I'm not immune to this either. I think sometimes we look at studies to again support what we already believe. And so we'll latch on to a study because, I've seen this with, in the raw feeding community where people will take an obscure study and say this proves that raw feeding is good for dogs, but when you actually read into the study, it's just like, is that really what it's proving? And
Yep.
I think there was one a few years ago where it was a study of, I think it was something about, was it water? Or no, it was putting moisture in kibble. So soaking kibble in water and what that does for dogs. And they came out that it actually wasn't the benefit that people thought it was. But when you looked into the study, we didn't know the type of kibble that was being soaked. We didn't know what it was being soaked with, I don't think. I don't know if it was water. Then people asked about the temperature of water, if it was filtered water. But then it came out that it was in a very strict laboratory environment. So we also didn't know how long the kibble was being soaked for. There were just so many questions. But on the surface of like with the title of the study, there were people in the comments that were going to like, oh, well, I'll stop soaking my kibble in things because obviously it's bad for my dogs. No one had gone through and started asking those questions. And it's just one of those where I've learned to look at things and say, well, this is a good start. This is an interesting finding. Now let's keep going. And I
Yep.
think that's what, social media is such a great way of exposing us to so many new things, but it's also such a great way to get misled
Absolutely.
because we're misinterpreting what we're learning.
Absolutely. We definitely, and this is something that, I am a human. And so I'm at fault of this too. We have selective hearing and selective listening and
Yeah,
selective reading, right? We like being right. We like having what we believe supported. And humans hate cognitive dissonance, right? We don't like something that
that's what
doesn't
it
agree
is.
with what we already think. And as someone who has dedicated my life to science, and is, for the past 13, 14 years now, ever since I started college, quote unquote, way back when. I realized it's not that long ago. Um, I have tried really hard to make sure that I never come in with a bias that is going to keep me from reading a study a certain way or understanding a patient a certain way. I do specific things with my dogs, and the animals that I see as a doctor might do things differently, right? Like personally, I don't feed raw food. I have owners that do, and their dogs are perfectly healthy. And it's so easy for me as someone who does not do it to want to say, well, you should switch because I don't do it this way.
Mhm.
And my dog's healthy and I'm a doctor. But there's a million right ways to do things like you mentioned. And there are, it's so easy to want to have everyone support everything that you do and read studies that only support what you think is right. And that is going to let you miss a lot of really important information and a lot of really important perspectives. I think everyone has something important to bring to the table and important to share. And every study has something in there as well. And it's really easy to miss them because of that.
Mhm. I agree.
So I feel like we can't let you go without mentioning that if you have a specialization in cardiology, DCM was a very big topic a couple of years ago. Is that something at all that's being looked at in connection with your work and with diets?
Yeah, so it's not a direct endpoint of our TRIAD study, but we will, as for the dogs that are in the cardiology arm, they get an echocardiogram, so an ultrasound of the heart every 6 months. And that is the best way to diagnose DCM. And so if they develop DCM as part of the study, we will catch it for sure. We also, every year for every member of the Dog Aging Project Pack, we send them what we call an annual follow-up survey. And it is a pretty lengthy 3 or 4 hour long survey that says, in the past year, has your dog been diagnosed with any of these disorders or diseases? And it goes through every body system you could ever imagine. And then anything that we might not have mentioned, there's a section for people to add in at the very end, right? Any other diseases. And cardiac is one of those sections, and DCM is a diagnosis within that section. So any animal that is part of the project that has their owner filling out these surveys has the chance to let us know if their animal has been diagnosed with DCM, similar for cats with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy or HCM or any cardiac disease or any GI disease or any kidney disease that you could possibly imagine, and on and on and on. And so that data is available not only to us, but to the public in our curated data report. I don't know that we've looked at that directly yet. At least I haven't, but it is there for us to look at. And so that is something that we could look at as far as breed predispositions, as far as age predispositions, geographical predispositions potentially. Uh, in the survey, owners will also often report what their dog eats. I know that diet and DCM is a very, very big discussion that we still don't fully know the answers to. We always talk about the risk of eating grain-free with the development of DCM. That's the big link that everyone is looking at right now. The jury is very much still out. I am not going to say one way or another whether it causes it because we truly just don't know. But that is something that we do have the possibility and the potential to look at as part of our study, assuming we continue to get more and more data, which with the participants we have in our study, I know that we're going to get more and more data because they are so dedicated. If we can even help one baby step in figuring out the link between diet and DCM or the prevalence of DCM, I think that would be a huge success for us.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, we often hear about corporate influence of funding on studies. If a company wants to come out with a new drug, suddenly they'll fund a study that shows that this drug helps this disease. And so my understanding is that the Dog Aging Project, instead of being funded like through corporations or pharmaceutical companies or anything, is funded through like the National Institutes of Health, and it's like more grant and considered like more independently funded. Just as a veterinarian generally, like, do you get concerned about the corporate or pharmaceutical influence of studies? And like, do you look at something like this as kind of more clean or, more
It's
neutral?
a good question. Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good question. I think that goes back to talking about reading those studies with a critical eye. It does not by any means fully discount a study for me if it's funded by a company or a corporation. But I take that into account where, we think about, do they have an ulterior motive for publishing this, right? Whether that's selling more product or whatever the case may be. And again, this is not talking about any study in specific, but it is absolutely something that I think about. One of the things that I make sure I read with every paper I read is the funding section and the conflicts of interest section, because bias exists in the world in every facet, whether it's veterinary medicine or, you know, who knows? When you go to the bank, I'm sure there's biases that are involved there as well, right? In every step of life, there are going to be biases, whether explicit or implicit. And so it's something I take into account. Like I said, by no means does it fully discredit a study, but it's definitely something that is important to know. As far as does it make the dog aging project more clean, it is nice in that it does get rid of that bias of, well, we're being funded by quote unquote rapamycin, which is not the case. But it's not. We're not trying to sell you rapamycin. We're not trying to promote anything that will make us money. We are trying to help dogs and help the people that come with them. We want them to live longer and live healthier. And so I think that is a very active effort by us to take funding from the sources that we take funding from. We have a very widespread funding sources. But I think that it really works to our goal of, we want this to be work that is publicly available and is exclusively there to help people and animals. And we don't want anything tripping that up. And so that's, I think, why we take a lot of the funding from the places that we do. I think that is why, we make everything open source, free to the public. Every paper that we publish, we guarantee will never be behind a paywall. You don't need to be part of an academic institution to access our papers or our data. This is research that is done by the people. This is by the owners. We are just the ones that package it and then give it back to them. So, it's really important that we do everything we can to make sure that there are no roadblocks in that way. And I think all of that comes down to where we get our funding, how we publish our papers, how we make our data accessible, and things like that.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so, when you say you make the data accessible, like, anyone can access it. And so if if you're sitting there wondering like, oh, I wonder if dogs in urban areas versus rural areas, is there a connection with disease? Like, you could, if you have the statistical ability, analysis ability to determine that, like, you would have access to look that up for yourself.
Absolutely. There's a link on our website to our publications website, which will have a link to a data access form. If you fill out that access form and agree to a couple stipulations, I think one of the biggest ones is you're not going to make money using our data, right? We don't want this to be something that is making money for people, right? This is community science. We don't want to profit off of your animals. That's not why we're here. And so if you fill out the form, you'll get a link to the website that has the data, instructions on how to use it, and it's yours. And like I said, we update it every year.
Nice.
When I was in college, Kimberly, I did some of this. I'm like super nerding out.
I'm like really excited to just dive into. I haven't gosh, can't use my words. I haven't gone through it in a while, probably because I originally signed Bella up, but I didn't keep up with everything. There's just too much going on. So that was closed. So I was going to go in and sign her up again, even though she's 2 years old, no longer a puppy, but nothing
That's
really.
Okay. It's never too late.
Yeah,
It's
nothing
never too
really
late.
happened to the first 2 years. So
well, I hope nothing big happens the next couple of years. I hope it's a nice smooth sailing for the rest of the time. And I will say my Great Dane's name was Bella as well. So I have a soft spot for all the Bellas.
So do you, because this is so funny, when I got her, I got so much pushback on her name because it's so common. And I told people, it's not about the name, it's about the why behind the name. And so her name, she was part of a litter. We call them the princess litter. I am on the board of directors of a rescue here. And it was the princess litter. So they were all named after Disney princesses. And she was originally named Mulan. But it was like, first of all, she didn't respond to it. And two, for some reason, it just didn't roll off the tongue. And so my favorite Disney princess is Belle.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why and I like 2-syllable names for my dogs, at least 2 syllables. So that's why she's Bella. So she's a combination between Belle from Beauty and the Beast and Bella from Twilight.
Because Kimberly's in the Pacific Northwest, so.
Yes.
Perfect. It makes perfect
Yes.
sense.
And so I figure if I get another girl dog, I will continue the Twilight theme, the Twilight or princess theme. And then the boy dogs are Greek gods. So I have an Apollo. And so.
I love it. My Bella was named after my great grandmother who had recently passed away, and her name was Nanny Bell. And so we took Belle and turned it to Bella as well. And now I have a 9-year-old retired racing greyhound whose name is Xander. His
Love
litter of greyhounds 9 years ago back in Texas, they were born. All of them had Disney names as well, not princesses, but there was a Simba and a Mufasa and a someone from Beauty and the Beast. And then his was Xander. And I've looked it up so many times. I can't find a single Xander in a Disney cartoon. I don't know why they picked Xander for him, but it fits him perfectly.
Well, and what's so funny is that I was thinking, what was that movie? Tangled, but I don't think the guy is Xander. I don't know.
I know who you're talking about too, and I can't remember his name.
I can't remember his name, but that's what I thought when you brought it up.
Flynn Rider.
Yeah, there it is. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you so much.
TV talk.
So if people want to become a part of the dog aging project and have their dog be a part of this, how can they do that?
Yeah, the easiest way is to go to our website, dogagingproject.org. There will be links there to sign your dog up for the Dog Aging Project Pack. It's a very easy process. Once you get into it, like Kimberly mentioned, there are a lot of surveys to fill out, and it does take a little while. But the actual part of enrolling them to start is very easy. So dogagingproject.org. If you are interested in our interventional trial, so that's the trial of rapamycin in aging dogs, there is a fast track link on the website as well, or you can go to dogagingproject.org/triad, TRIAD, and find out, if your dog is initially eligible. It'll show you kind of the base enrollment criteria, at least 7 years of age, between 20 and 44 kilograms, so a medium to large size dog, in general, good health, good temperament. I think those are the big ones. And there'll be a whole list on there of if your dog fits these categories, then sign up for the Dog Aging Project and we'll screen you as a member of TRIAD. And if you fit the other kind of more stringent criteria based on medical record evaluation, things like that, then we could do a screening exam at that point, assuming you live near a TRIAD site. And we do have TRIAD sites across a lot of the country, but not everywhere yet. And so we're still expanding to more and more sites. We're in a number of different states right now, but if you look at that TRIAD website, so the dogagingproject.org/triad, I believe there's a map showing which states we have sites in right now as well.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, we will have links for all that because I'm imagining that all of our listeners are going to want to show that eating a fresh food diet does help increase longevity. So
we're looking at absolutely everything. And although, like I said, we are an aging project, that does not mean your dog has to be old to be enrolled, only as part of the interventional trial. So if you adopted a dog yesterday at 8 weeks and you want them to be part of the pack, they are allowed to be enrolled. So we're welcoming anyone and everyone.
So at any age, any time in your ownership process.
They can be 8 weeks old or 18 years old. And if they want to be a part of the pack, as long as they're a dog, they are welcome.
Awesome.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much.
I know.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It's been a blast.